Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Operation Swipe Right, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Daughter to Artemis, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Operation Swipe Right, Chapter 2, Family Dinner. Goddess Tales, how is it that you just get better and better at this cooking thing? Rael asked as she leaned her shoulders back heavily into her chair. The plate in front of her barely showing signs of having been used. It was so empty. There was a murmur of agreement from everyone else seated around the large dining room table. Almost every plate was empty, after having been filled to the edges with the feast that Tally had made for them all. As they had enjoyed their dinner, Sarah had also brought out some of her best vintage wines and liqueurs, and all of them had indulged, each of their glasses having been topped off at least once, leaving them all pleasantly buzzed. The warm atmosphere in the house grew even warmer as they all settled into the soft haze of familial bliss that came after spending hours together after being apart for so long. Cooking thing? Tally laughed. I take it, Scylla, you're still doing most of the cooking? Tally asked as she sipped what remained from her wine glass. Scylla grinned. Of course. Hey! Rael complained. I cook spaghetti and eggs. Oh, not together, I hope. Isadora cringed, and the table erupted into laughter as Rael tossed a napkin at the scientist. Seriously, Tally, thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for hosting. Rael offered her sister and Sarah, who were seated across from Scylla and Rael, seated next to each other, as they always were, a sincerely gratuitous smile splitting her face. You're the one visiting and somehow still ended up cooking, Abigail tisked, as if anyone else had offered to be the one to host or cook their family meal. She leaned forward and looked down at the length of the table at Rael, who leaned forward to meet her gaze knowingly. Look, I can cook you the meanest eggs you have ever seen and some non-noteworthy spaghetti the next time you're in town, Bellwether. The chuckles around the table were soft. But I don't see you inviting us to your mansion in Spring Valley, D.C. to cook for us. Rael, Scylla whispered as she placed her hand on her wife's leg. The joyous and teasing atmosphere lost as they all thought about why Rael wasn't invited to Abigail's D.C. home. Look, come on, guys. I'm just joking, Rael huffed, flushing as she crossed her arms over her chest and sat a bit straighter in her chair. Abigail doesn't cook, Kalita outed her sister-in-law immediately. Adil and I do most of the cooking. Or our chef does, Abigail stressed, tilting her glass towards Kalita. And you should be grateful I don't cook. I may be as bad as Sarah. Everyone blanched. No one is as bad as Sarah. Callie was the one to voice what they all were feeling. The injured gasp that sounded to Tally's right pulled the knower's eyes away from her sisters across the table. Out. Tally giggled as she booped Sarah on the tip of her nose. You know it's true, and it doesn't mean we love you any less. We just like to not end up with food poisoning. Besides, you provide the place to host us all. Tally smiled brightly, brushing the same finger she poked Sarah's nose with over the edge of Sarah's jaw before dropping it back down into her own lap. Yes, just please don't ever cook again, please, Abigail begged, making everyone giggle. The former youngest member of the group had been the one to face the food poisoning the worst. Where everyone else had gotten over the sickness from Sarah's cooking in 36 hours, Kalita had continued to be ill for almost 72 hours after everyone else had gotten better. As angry as Kalita had been at Sarah, aghast that a 330-plus-year-old woman didn't know how to cook when she, a 12-year-old, knew how to cook, had been entertaining. But Sarah, in her penance, had taken gentle and wonderful care of Kalita while she was sick, which had finally broached the chasm that had lied between them. Fighting the same enemy, and Kalita realizing that there were some things in the world worth fighting for, had helped as well. I assure you, I have no intentions of ever having to live through that horror again. Sarah often compared the horror of their entire group getting food poisoning, twice, from eating her meals to the height of the Revolutionary War and the peak of consumption. Wait, hold up, back to Bellwether. Rael waved her hand to break up the gooey-eyed stare going on between Tally and Sarah, which was pretty normal, and no one batted an eyelash at any more. You have a chef? Rael burst forward again to look down the length of the table at her sister. Abigail grinned as she wiggled her eyebrows at Rael. And a house cleaner. Abigail hid her smile behind her wine glass. Rael snapped her eyes to Scylla, and the necro shook her head. No, no, we're not hiring a cook. Rael opened her mouth. Or a house cleaner. Rael's shoulders sagged. Oh, but Syl, that's not fair. You sound like Willa, Scylla teased, whooping Rael on the nose in a very similar manner that Tally had just done to Sarah. Scylla was just glad that this was. And a chauffeur, Adil added, rolling his eyes at the exuberance of his wife's position. Rael threw her arms up and around in exasperation. Scylla sent Adil a sharp look. You just had to go there, huh? I'd almost had her calm down. What about you, Tally? Anacostia turned the conversation towards Tally and away from Rael and Abigail. You going to invite any of us out to Germany during your stay? She tried to see Tally, but her mother was seated upright and blocked the view of the red-headed knower. Anacostia sighed heavily and pushed her hand against her mother's shoulder, pushing her back into the seat so that Anacostia could see Tally without having to lean half over the table. Sarah allowed the physical handling of her person, though she did have a little fun by reaching out to get her whiskey glass, lifting her arm up and down as Anacostia tried to go above or below her arm to see Tally. Really? Anacostia snapped. What are you, 12? Anacostia asked her grinning mother, though her own exasperation was all in good fun. At the ease in which Sarah Alder now just was herself, her true self, was a gift, one that Anacostia cherished. Even if she was slightly annoyed with her mother's antics when they were at her expense. Sarah sipped her whiskey. No, 340, dear. 341. Anacostia and Sarah turned to the sound of Tally's voice. You're 341. Sarah tapped the rim of her glass against her bottom lip as she did the math in her head. You're right. Sarah turned back to Anacostia. I'm 341. Abigail snorted and Rael grinned at the exchange across from them. Anacostia rolled her eyes. You're still a big overgrown child. Sarah leaned back, accepting that she did now, in fact, resemble an overgrown child. But typically she only acted so freely when she was surrounded by the people she cared most about and trusted, and in her own home. Outside of these walls she was still General Alder, but within them she was just Sarah, and her family liked it that way. So, Tally. Anacostia shot her mother a baleful glare, both of their lips twitching in their shared amusement before Anna looked to Tally. Tally swirled her wine around her glass before snapping her attention back to Anacostia. Yes, Anna? When are you going to invite us to come visit? Well, whenever you're free, of course, you're all welcome, Tally was quick to offer, her eyes looking to meet Sarah's every few seconds. The apartment that they provided me has 3 bedrooms, 4 if you count the office. Speaking of Germany, Scylla grinned, looking towards the kids' table where Gemma and Willa were already busy coloring as they finished their meals. Cameron was tucked into the living room taking a nap. Noting where the children were, Scylla continued, and Tally sucked in a worried breath. Scylla only looked to see where the kids were before she continued speaking when she was going to say something inappropriate. How was Beltane with the Germanic witches? Sarah coughed, having inhaled her whiskey instead of swallowing it. The slap of the glass on the table, followed by her palm, startled everyone, including Willa and Gemma, who snapped their heads towards the adult table. They watched as their Aunt Anna jumped up from her seat and smacked Grandmère Sarah's back once, twice, 3 times. Sarah waved off Anakash's assistance, which was really just an excuse for her daughter to get to smack her. She knew. And Sarah took in a slow breath. It pained her for a moment before the spasms ceased, and she leaned back into her chair. Sorry. Sarah wheezed out her apology. Tally rested her hand on Sarah's thigh and waited for the former general to meet her eyes so that she could ensure that Sarah was all right. Sarah squeezed Tally's hand as it lay on her thigh, needing to say nothing at all to reassure Tally that she was fine. Excuse you two? Abigail broke the moment with her voice, pulling Sarah and Tally's eyes from each other and to look at the slightly inebriated bellwether. But I want to know how Tally's Beltane in Germany was, too. Scylla and Abigail shared a right look before they both turned to Tally, ready to tag team the knower in their interrogation. Tally rolled her eyes at her sister's excitement. How was your Beltane? It was usually easy to distract Abigail with giving her the floor to talk about her earth-shattering, rocking sex life with her husband. Amazing, as always. Right, babe? Abigail looked to her right and Adil was blushing, while Khalida chuckled at her brother's expense. We tried this thing where... Oh, no, 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 no specifics, please. He is, after all, still my older brother. Khalida begged, waving her hands into the air to stop Abigail from continuing with her story. The 22-year-old had matured well in her last 10 years, but she drew the line at hearing specific details about her brother's sex life with his wife. Abigail rolled her eyes and sighed. Fine, but you're missing out. It was great, Abigail promised, meeting everyone's eyes around the table, while Adil tried to make the earth swallow him whole to escape the embarrassment. Even after all these years, Abigail's sexual brashness was just a tad too free for him. We're sure it was. Sarah placated the tipsy bellwether. Oh, please, Miss General of Voyeurism. With your DS at the top of the hill where we can all watch you get it on with... Abigail stopped talking as she sat back in her chair. Huh. Actually, you weren't here for Beltane this year. Or last year. Or how many years has it been since you've been naked in front of us? Really, Abs? Rael inquired, her eyes wide and cheeks red. Really? What? I just obviously meant during Beltane. Abigail circled her head around as she exaggerated the holiday's name. Tally stiffened beside Sarah, her grip on her thigh tightening, before she seemed to realize what she was doing and removed her hand. Sarah frowned, watching as Tally took back her hand and rested it on her own lap. She missed the warmth of Tally's hand almost immediately. How long had it been there that she felt its absence so keenly? 4. I think it's been 4 Beltanes, Scylla supplied, as she took a swig of her beer. Sarah wondered how this had turned to questioning her Beltane history. Hadn't they been talking about Abigail's Beltane history? And oh, right, they'd gotten to her Beltane history because they asked about Tally's. I was in Fort Salem for the last 3. I just chose to participate in my own way, which meant she hadn't been out in the open like she always had been in the past. She wanted privacy. Abigail chuckled. What, is the witch father getting a little self-conscious as he ages? Doesn't want anyone to see how wrinkly and soft he become? Sarah sighed heavily. Abigail, your crudeness has no bounds. Abigail grinned as if Sarah had just paid her a glowing compliment. Oh! Oh! Abigail sat up so fast she got dizzy. Is it not him? Are you afraid that we're going to see how wrinkly and soft and saggy you're getting? Abigail! And Akasha and Rael each hissed the other woman's name, while Tally and Scylla stared open-mouthed at Abigail. All of the woman. Isadora just sat in her seat, watching, enjoying all of the earnest and real interaction between this close-knit group. Sarah's smile was almost feral. I can assure you, Abigail, I have nothing to be self-conscious about. You're right. You're still insanely hot for a 340-year-old hag. Abigail finished the last of her wine, frowning as she looked at the empty glass. Hadn't it just been full? Had she just had that much of it already? Oh, no, that would not do. She needed more pronto. Maybe you've had enough, Abs? Rael asked her sister as she grabbed the bottle of wine before Abigail could pick it up to top off her glass. One more isn't going to kill me, shitbird. Hand it over. I don't get to indulge in these types of vintages often. Abigail opened and closed her fingers in a give-me gesture. Rael looked at Adil, who inclined his head. Abigail was tipsy, but another glass wouldn't make her any more so than she already was. Rael shrugged, handing over the bottle to the grabby bellwether. Exquisite taste in wine, Sarah. Abigail complimented her as she sighed, indulging in a generous sip of the priceless wine. Not great taste in Beltane partners, but you're forgiven for that. Tally nearly imperceptibly flinched as Abigail brought up Witchfather and Sarah's Beltane partners. But Sarah, attuned to every little detail about Tally Craven, caught it immediately, but knew not how to make the knower feel any better. I'm so glad I have your absolution, Abigail, Sarah teased, comfortable with Abigail's sudden fascination with her own Beltane activities. Well, Anacostia began, now that I know Abigail has an unhealthy obsession with my mother's Beltane partners and body, Abigail cheered them all, lifting her glass as the group laughed. Tally! Anacostia sighed, shaking her head. Tell us, how is Germany treating you? Abigail was glad this topic came back around. And how is the... Don't choke this time, Sarah. Germanic Tally rolled her eyes. Germany has been treating me well. The students I have are talented. Tally ignored Abigail and Scylla's sigh of boring and continued, looking at Anacostia instead of her pestering sisters. General Herman is an impressive leader. She has a unique structure to her office and has some interesting thoughts about the use of some of the new cannon work and how it might be utilized outside of combat. General Gisela Herman is odd and Sarah winced as Anacostia kicked her under the table. She turned a pointed glare to her daughter, who was ignoring her gaze and instead holding Tally's eyes. Anacala had just gotten Tally to start talking about her time in Germany. She wasn't about to let her mother go off on how she loathed General Herman, which was only a recent development, because before 3 months ago, Sarah Alder had never had a bad thing to say about General Gisela Herman. Tally, having easily caught Sarah's comment, smiled softly. Gisela is very sweet. Odd, but sweet. Everyone is sweet to you, Craven, Sarah intoned fondly. Tally's smile became cocky. Well, I am adorable. Nicta's right. It's the dimples. It's always the dimples. People see them and it's just like... Rael snapped her fingers. They're instantly in love with you. Sarah stiffened at the suggestion that anyone, and possibly General Herman or Nicta Batan, had fallen in love with Tally at first sight, though Nicta's love for Tally was questionable. Tally swore that Nicta loved her like a mentor or parent might love a child, but Sarah wasn't as convinced, even after all this time. Tally blushed. Come on, Ray, not everyone falls in love with me. Tally tried not to look to her left. Valiantly, she did. Truly. Enough of them do. Kalita spoke from the head of the table, and Tally stared at her young friend with a wounded open-mouth expression. What? How many witches pledged themselves to you? Not the army, but you during the war. Nicta Batan pledged her whole spree army to help you and your cause. Not the army. Certainly not my mother or Sarah, Abigail reminded them all. So, How many witches is it by association that pledged themselves to her, do you think? Abigail turned to Scylla. Hey, Death Girl, how many spree members were left when Nicta dropped the knee to Tally? In the United States or worldwide? Scylla asked, playing along. Both. I don't care. Just ballpark it for me, Ramshorn. Abigail hated numbers. So the fact that she was asking for any at all spoke volumes to how inebriated she was. At least a couple thousand. A couple thousand? That's like several brigades! Abigail grinned. All pledged because of Tally's dimples. Tally flushed even redder, while Sarah drowned herself in her whiskey. Not liking the memories that were brought up with just how many people pledged themselves to Tally Craven over their 7-year war with the Camarilla. Speaking of Nicta, how is she? Tally asked, looking around the table and noting the empty seat at the head of the table to her right that usually held Nicta. Nicta is Nicta, Scylla shrugged, smiling. She's coming back from her placement in New Mexico City. In what, 5 days? Scylla asked Anacostia. Anacostia finished her glass of wine before answering. 8 days. You mean to tell me you haven't kept in touch? Abigail asked. Doesn't sound like you, Tally. It's because she's too busy enjoying the male witches in Germany. Scylla pushed, trying to get back on topic, but was mostly ignored. Tally smiled as she stared across the table at her sister, shrugging her shoulders as she answered. Nicta actually came to visit me last month. Sarah stared at Tally. She hadn't realized Nicta had visited Tally, and by the shocked looks around the table, no one else had known that either. She did? Mm-hmm. Tally hummed her answer as she took a small sip of her wine. During her break. Tally seemed surprised no one at the table knew of the visit. Do any of you keep in touch with Nicta? Tally inquired pointedly. Scylla and Nicta talk once every week or so, Rail shrugged. She had never gotten along with Nicta all that well. Of the older witches that Rail had served with during the war, it had been Sarah Alder that she connected with because of their mutual connection to the mycelium. I knew she was going out of the country, but I didn't know she was flying to Germany to visit you. They all knew how much Nicta hated flying over oceans. Sarah was doing her best to not think about Nicta and Tally spending time together in Germany while Nicta was on her break. Her eyes roamed over the table, wondering if she could get up and start cleaning without it looking too suspicious. It was as she looked at the empty plates that Sarah noted Tally's wine glass was only a quarter way full. She stood and took the bottle of white wine that Tally had been drinking and topped off her glass before sitting back down. The soft, thankful smile that brought out those infamous dimples caused Sarah's whole body to warm. Oh, no thanks, Ma. I don't want any. Anacostia picked up the bottle and poured herself a glass, grinning as she saw Sarah's cheeks flushing at the teasing. She didn't blush when there was talk of how her body parts might be sagging as she got older, but she blushed when she was teasing for topping Tally's wine glass off and not her daughter's empty glass. If Nicta's seen her, we should too, Abigail announced, nodding as she turned to Adil. We should visit Tally in Germany. Rael laughed. But no dramatic D for you, Bellwether. Abigail rolled her eyes. Please, shitbird, I don't need any other. Don't. No. Kalita slapped her hands over her ears and closed her eyes, afraid that even if she were to block her ears, Abigail might gesture or she could read the woman's lips as she spoke of her brother's anatomy. Abigail grinned wickedly as she looked at Kalita, the sister-in-law that she had gotten incredibly close with over the last 10 years. It was nice having a younger sibling to tease. Sometimes it was even more fun to tease Kalita than it was to tease Tally. How long was Nicta's stay? Sarah asked, turning away from the rest of the group, more interested in Tally explaining Nicta's visit than Abigail's need to tease and taunt everyone at the table. Tally thought about how long Nicta had stayed with her. Just sort of 2 weeks. They hadn't been able to spend a lot of time sightseeing together as Tally had still been working, but it had been nice to come back to her rented apartment and have a friendly face there for the time Nicta has stayed. We made the most of the 2 weekends she was there, as I was still working, but I did get a few afternoons off so I could show her around and do some sightseeing. Sightseeing with Nick de Baton. What the world has come to. And Akasha shook her head, and Rael tilted her beer towards Anna in salute and agreement. Weren't you in Germany a few weeks ago, Sarah? Isadora asked from the far end of the table, where she sat next to Kalida at the head of the table to her left, and Anakostia to her right. Everyone looked at Isadora as if she just supplied them with the secret meaning of life, and as if they had forgotten that she was even there, which Abigail had, even though she was seated directly across from her. Sarah cleared her throat as she picked up her glass and sipped from it. Yes, I was. You mean you went to Germany and you didn't see Tally while you were there? Rael guffawed, mouth open in horrified shock. That's not nice, Sarah, Rael tisked the elder witch. Scylla and Abigail, as well as Anacostia, were silent, all three women staring at Sarah, watching as she tried and failed to hide a flush. And when they looked from Sarah's pink cheeks to Tally, the redhead was also busy taking a very long drink from her wineglass, nearly finishing the full goblet in one go. Craven, haven't you been seeing someone? Anacostia asked, bringing up the topic to who Tally was spending time with in Germany all over again. Abigail jumped on the topic, as did Scylla. I knew it! I knew you were seeing someone! Abigail tried to assure everyone that she had been right all along with her assumption. Who is he? Is he handsome? Tell me he's handsome, Tally. Don't tell me you're seeing someone fugly. You're too pretty for that. Abigail, Adil hissed, even as everyone else tried to hide their smirks and chuckles at Abigail's audacity. She's also a hell of a lot nicer than you, Bellwether, and looks don't mean as much to her. Rael rolled her eyes as Abigail flipped her off. Rael met Tally's eyes. It doesn't matter what he looks like, Tally, as long as he treats you right. He's treating you well, isn't he? Tally's cheeks flushed, and when she looked away from Rael's probing gaze and Abigail's outright intimidating glare, as if she was just waiting for Tally to admit out loud that she was dating someone that Abigail would find lacking in the aesthetic department. Why is she so red? Kalida asked. Is he not treating you well? The only remaining elder of the Turum's tribe's eyes darkened, and the air crackled with her power. What is his name? Tally flinched at the question. I will destroy him. You need only give me his name. Kalida swore, and the vehemence of her threat made the hairs on everyone's necks stand on edge. Sarah was by far the most affected by the threat issued, her eyes flashing with her own desire to protect the witch beside her. Even if she felt like her heart was being chipped away at slowly, as if a paleontologist was excavating it slowly from her chest. Each question, each moment Tally didn't refute the fact that she was seeing a male witch, they dug deeper and deeper, sure to find their prize momentarily. Scylla stared, curiously, peeling back each layer that Tally was trying to cover herself with. It isn't. He. Isn't it, Tally? Tally squeezed her eyes closed as she dropped her hand to Sarah's knee, softly leaving it there, knowing she would have to squeeze it tight to keep the older woman seated as she answered Scylla's question. No, I've been seeing a woman. Sarah, true to what Tally expected, almost jumped out of her seat. Her knee banged against the table in her haste to turn to stare at Tally. The sudden shift in the air no longer caused by Kalida's anger and menacing threat. Abigail spit out what little wine she had left in her mouth. God damn! Tally, what happened to you over in Europe? Did the water turn you gay? Rael's eyes widened as she and Anacostia each rebuked. Abigail! Was just the use of her name. Abigail wasn't bothered in the least. She knows I'm just kidding. I know it doesn't work like that. Sheesh! Lighten up, shitbird. Kalida, relaxed from her murderous intent a moment before, smiled as she crossed her arms over her chest and stared at Tally. So, Tally, what's she like? Is everyone ready for dessert? Tally asked as she put her glass down on the table a little harder than she had intended to. She stood and didn't wait for anyone to respond. She was already 3 steps away from the table by the time anyone had even voiced their outrage. Sit back down. Dessert can wait. Speak for yourself. I've been looking forward to her dessert all day. Goddess, do you ever think with your brain and not your stomach? Don't you want to know who Tally's seeing? Of course I do. But if she doesn't want to tell us yet, then that's her business. I'll help you. Sarah stood from her chair, dropping her cloth napkin to her seat as she followed Tally into the kitchen. Before they were into the kitchen, Sarah caught up with Tally and pulled her down the hallway, clearly not towards the kitchen. They could still get to the kitchen that way, but it would take longer, and it would bring them further away from the dining room and eavesdropping ears. Sarah felt dizzy with the need to know if Tally was in fact seeing a woman. Before she could even open her mouth to inquire, Tally cupped her left cheek with her palm and stepped up onto her tiptoes. I'm not seeing General Herman. Tally waited a beat. Or Nikta. I'm not. Tally sighed heavily as she rested her forehead against Sarah's. I haven't seen anyone except my Beltane partner. Tally relished how close they stood, hidden away in this alcove, the heat of Sarah's body seeping into her own as the swell of her breast brushed against her own. The bitter blow of Sarah's breath that Tally could practically taste the whiskey off of. It was heaven to be this close to Sarah. It was also hell to be this close to Sarah and not be able to remain here, where she longed to be the most. Tally felt tears burn in her eyes, so she closed them tightly, hiding them from Sarah's ever watchful gaze. Let's just get dessert, huh? Tally asked, as she sank back onto the heels of her feet and took a deliberate step away from Sarah. Otherwise, we'll have a mutiny on our hands, and one mutiny in my lifetime is enough for me. Sarah's soft chuckle was quieted as she watched Tally walk away. The pain in her chest eased to be informed that Tally wasn't seeing Nikta or General Herman. But was Tally seeing someone else? Did she have competition for Tally's affections? Had she lost her chance? Had she waited too long? Tally's Beltane partner. That it didn't make sense to Sarah. How could Tally only be seeing her Beltane partner? Sarah frowned as she made her way into the kitchen behind Tally, her shoulders pulled back and set in her determination to not let this bother her. Not now. They would discuss this later. It always came down to her and Tally pushing this discussion off. And although Sarah longed to finally have it, she knew they wouldn't, just as they hadn't in the last several years. That was weird, wasn't it? Scylla asked, leaning forward towards the center of the table, while Abigail and Anacostia did as well, completing a perfect triangle of interest. What was? Rael asked, having missed whatever her wife and sisters had picked up on. Rael met Adil's eyes around Scylla's back, and he just shrugged his shoulders, having missed whatever it was the women had noticed. When exactly was Sarah in Germany? Abigail asked, seemingly sobered up immediately. Anacostia had to think about it. Isadora answered for her when she saw the Major General floundering for the exact dates. A few days before Beltane until the week after. Anna dropped her hand to Isadora's knee and squeezed it in thanks, and forgot to remove it as she looked to Abigail and Scylla. The only one noticing the soft smile and pretty blush on Isadora's cheeks was Rael. When Isadora met Rael's eyes, the fixer winked and just sipped at her drink, waiting for the three women around her to actually speak aloud what they were all unanimously thinking. You don't think she was there for Beltane with Tally, do you? Scylla asked, turning to look at Abigail, who shook her head. No. No way. But she didn't sound as sure as she wanted to, and her eyes slipped to Anacostia. Right? Tally swore she'd never say anything to Sarah. Made us swear never to say anything to Sarah. If she wasn't so damn good with her new work, I would have said something to Sarah ages ago, Scylla complained, hating that when they all had agreed not to talk about how close and obviously in love Sarah and Tally were with each other, that they had silenced themselves, binding themselves in a promise where they couldn't talk to Sarah Alder about how irrevocably in love Tally Craven was with her. Anna shrugged, but it was certainly something to talk about with her mother. They both don't celebrate Beltane anymore, Rael reminded the whispering, conspiring witches. When they all looked to her, she exaggerated her own expression. Oh, now you want me to help. What do you know, shitbird? Abigail narrowed her eyes, everyone watching as Rael sipped at her beer and leaned back in her seat. Oh, nothing. Just that if you all paid attention, you'd have noticed that for the last 3, no, 4, yeah, 4 years, neither Tally or Sarah participate in the reel during Beltane. They're there before the dance, drinking and laughing with all of us, but they always disappear, one after the other, before it starts. None of them really participated in the reel unless they felt like dancing. The reel had been bringing them together with their partners for almost a decade at this point. There was no hesitation for them to join in on the dance and think they wouldn't end up with their spouses. Most times, Rael and Abigail tried to get Tally to join in on the reel, but Tally hadn't for years. She enjoyed Beltane how she wanted, and that was enough for Tally, so it was enough for her sisters. Abigail and Rael did see Tally the morning after, and she always looked dizzy with happiness. They always assumed she found a partner, but after the first time of them trying to pry it out of her, they hadn't tried again. Tally had gotten really mad. Really mad. She yelled at them, telling Rael and Abigail off when they kept insisting to know who rocked her world after she asked them several times to leave her alone about it, that she just wanted it for herself. She apologized for snapping, but not for keeping her Beltane partner to herself. Abigail snapped her head towards Anacostia as if she heard the Major General's internal panic at Rael's correct deduction. Out with it, Quartermain. What is it you know? Abigail, like all bellwethers, was a dog with a bone when she smelt the slightest weakness or thought someone had important information she needed to know. Anacostia's eyes widened as she clamped down on her thoughts quickly. Nothing. I know nothing. All right, Jon Snow, Rael muttered, and Scylla grinned at her wife's pulp culture reference. Before anyone could interrogate Anacostia further, Tally and Sarah came back into the dining room. So, we have blueberry cobbler, double chocolate brownies, lemon squares, and more of the chocolate chip cookies, Tally announced as she and Sarah came back into the dining room with various desserts, each one of them holding 2 decorative plates. Tally put the plate of lemon squares in front of Anacostia and Sarah's seats, the blueberry cobbler between Kalida and Abigail, while the brownie sat between Rael and Scylla, and the cookies in front of Tally's chair. The placements were specific, making sure everyone's favorites were available to them. And just like kids in a candy shop, all of their eyes sparkled as Tally announced she'd made their favorites. A real treat now that they weren't all living close anymore. Oh! Oh! Me! Me! Both Gemma and Willa called out as they jumped from their seats at the round kids' table and raced towards the adults' table with their respective parents. Mom, can I have blueberry? Willa asked as she tugged on Scylla's shirt to get her mom's attention. Rael lifted the girl up and placed her on Scylla's lap with a smile. Scylla squeezed her daughter around the waist and kissed the back of her head. Rael smiled smittenly at the two of them, her hand resting on Scylla's shoulder. I don't understand how she likes blueberries, Scylla muttered to Rael, as both she and Rael hated blueberries. Abba, can I have a brownie, please? Gemma asked, as she stood by Adil's chair, between him and Scylla. Abigail cringed. Don't you want to try your Auntie Tally's blueberry cobbler? Which was Abigail's favorite that Kalida had come to share after Abigail had gotten her to try it. Adil enjoyed it as well, though he also liked to steal a lemon square too, so long as Sarah wasn't particularly possessive of them, as she sometimes could be if there weren't all that many. Though judging by the piled amount on the plate, there was enough that it would be safe for him to take one, but just the one. The rest were for Sarah and Anacostia. The lemon squares were Sarah's favorite, and as close to her mother's recipe as anyone had ever come in making the dessert. It had taken Tally countless tries to get the recipe just right. Not that anyone knew that but Nikta. who helped her while teasing the ever little shit out of her for her attempts to make Sarah her favorite dessert for her birthday while they were out in the field during the war. But all Tally had to do was threaten not to make Nicta's favorite red velvet birthday cake for her birthday that year, and Nicta shut up. Blech. Blueberries. Gemma shivered in exaggerated disgust. Abigail sighed heavily, clearly not understanding how her daughter couldn't like the most delicious dessert in all the world. Abigail looked at Adil, her expression clearly asking, what kind of bellwether didn't like blueberries? Only for her face to stiffen as she blamed him with her eyes only, that the fault somehow lie in his genes. Yes, Jem Bellwether, you have your priorities straight. Don't let your mother tell you different. Blueberries are blah. Rael met Gemma's eyes and winked at her niece. Come here. I'll get you some double chocolatey goodness. Rael opened her arms, and Gemma raced from her father to sit on Rael's lap. The fixer reached over to grab 3 gooey and somehow still warm brownies. She put one on her plate, Scylla's, and on a napkin right beside her plate for Jem. Tally smiled brightly as she watched her nieces and sisters. The serene contentment that filled her as she watched her family was unlike anything she'd ever felt. A soft touch on her thigh made Tally's shoulders sag, as if she were suddenly weightless, and the only thing holding her was the single hand on her leg. It kept her from floating off towards the ceiling and made this moment even more special and meaningful, because that touch meant she was sharing this moment with Sarah. Unbeknownst to Tally and Sarah, Anacostia watched the way Tally's smile went from content to beaming at the softest touch of her mother's hand. Hey, don't get greedy there, caveman, Anacostia warned as she saw Adil trying to sneak a third lemon square. Adil's grin was still boyish and far too handsome to remain mad at for long. Are these the famous lemon squares you rave about? Isadora asked as she picked one of the squares up right from Anacostia's plate and nibbled at it. She hummed her enjoyment, everyone around the table watching in awe. Everyone knew not to take food from Anacostia. It was just something you didn't do. Anacostia did not share. And yet, the soft, bashful smile on Anacostia's face as she nodded her head and couldn't meet Isadora's eyes straight on had everyone around the table grinning like mad. The only one brave enough to make a real sound about it was Rael. Be careful, Dora, or Anacostia will bite your hand. She's not the best sharer. Probably something to do with being spoiled by, General Alder as a kid. Scylla smacked Rael playfully on the shoulder for the tease, as Anacostia's cheeks burned even brighter. Anacostia wanted to stick her tongue out, but refrained. She was a grown woman, and even though these no-good rotten sisters of her made her feel like a kid, she wouldn't embarrass herself like that in front of Isadora. It was the biddies. They spoiled me like rotten. At my behest, Sarah admitted with a knowing grin. I couldn't possibly be the one to show favoritism. Abigail snorted. Yeah, right. Because you're so great at not showing favoritism. Abigail looked from Tally, who sat right next to Sarah, over to Rael, who sat across from her, and then landed on Anacostia. So good at not showing favoritism. Well, Abigail, if you weren't as insufferable as your mother, you might have been one of them. Oh, please. We all know I'm a favorite too. I just don't rank as high as these 3, but I'm your favorite bellwether. Sarah did not dispute that fact, and instead turned to Isadora as she fought off a smile. And yes, Isadora, these are the famous lemon squares. Tally found a recipe that comes as close as anyone's ever had to my mother's personal recipe. Oh, well, that must have taken a long time to perfect. Isadora nibbled on the lemon square, savoring it as she dropped that bit of information. It was as if Sarah had never realized that, yes, it probably had taken Tally a very long time to recreate this recipe. If it were possible, Sarah's heart swelled even more as she squeezed Tally's leg beneath the table. Isadora leant forward and praised Tally for how delicious the dessert was. Everything has been lovely. Thank you, Tally. A chorus of thank yous rang out across the table as everyone stuffed their faces with the latest goodies put out before them. Anakostia put the last of the dirty dishes on the counter next to the pile she already brought in. The drying rack was already full of pots, pans, and various utensils that Tally had used to make dinner, and Sarah had cleaned while Tally had gotten ready before their guests had arrived. I think this is the last of it. Just put it next to the rest, Sarah directed her daughter as she dropped some of the plates into a basin inside the deep, white farmhouse sink, filled with warm, sudsy water. Her sleeves already rolled up as she dunked her hands and forearms into the water and began washing the dishes. And Akashta moved to start putting the dried dishes away. For every dish she put away, her mother put in a new one back on the drying rack. Once the original set of dishes and cookware was away, Anakostia pulled out a clean dish rag and started drying the ones her mother was washing by hand. So, Isadora and I are dating? Anakostia choked on her own spit and nearly dropped the plate she was holding. She fumbled with it, spinning as she grabbed and tossed it up into the air to get a better grip on it before it smashed to the floor. Her heart racing as she clutched the plate tight against her chest, face flushed with the adrenaline rush. Telly would have killed her if she broke Sarah's good china. Nah, no, we're not dating. But you want to be. Sarah didn't even look over her shoulder at her daughter. Her attention was on the dishes she was cleaning. Yes, Anakostia sighed internally. Yes. She would like to be dating Isadora, but this conversation wasn't supposed to be about what she wanted, but what her mother wanted. Well, that doesn't really. That's not what I wanted to talk to you about. Anakostia stammered before her voice hardened, and she set her shoulders, ready to talk to her mother about swipe right. Very well. But for what it's worth, Sarah actually stopped washing the dishes, even as she left her hands within the water, and looked over her shoulder to hold Anakostia's eyes. I think you should ask her. Isadora will say yes. Anakostia felt her face heat up at the serious glint in her mother's eyes. Her throat suddenly felt full with all the emotion she didn't let herself feel when it came to the older scientist. She nodded her head and blinked away the tears, and that was enough for Sarah to smile softly at her before turning back to the dishes. What did you wish to speak to me about, Anna? Anakostia had to center herself again. It took a few moments to calm her racing heart, but when it settled, she just jumped in. Isadora and I would like for you to go on a date. Sarah's expression crinkled in confusion as she chuckled. With who? Well, there is this nice gentleman named. Sarah froze. If you say Augustus, I will pour this dirty dishwater over your head. Anacostia rolled her eyes, though she did take a deliberate step farther away from her mother, just in case Sarah decided she was going to use a seed to spout the dishwater at her. His name is David. He's the eldest of three, retired from service. He went to law school and owns his own law office. Lives just outside of Salem town. David. Sarah said the name slowly. I did not know you knew a David. Sarah couldn't recall her daughter ever speaking of a David, or Dave for that matter. Well, Anacostia wasn't exactly sure how to bring up how she had met David. Did her mother even know what a dating app was? And what makes you think I'm interested in going on this, what do they call them now, sightless dates? Sarah looked at Anacostia, sure that she had gotten the term correct. But the way Anna was biting her bottom lip from keeping from laughing, she realized she had gotten it wrong. Sighing heavily, she flicked a bit of the water at her daughter before she focused on her dishes. Anacostia hopped away from the suds her mother flicked at her. Blind. Blind dates. Sarah grinned, bemused. Ah, blind dates. Why do you think I should be going on one at all? This is where Anna got a little nervous. Well, Isadora and I thought. She trailed off because it was hard, really hard, to talk to Sarah about this after having such a lovely evening with her mother and their family. It was even harder to talk about this after seeing again how lovesick her mother appeared over Tally Craven. Sarah raised a brow. Yes? She encouraged her daughter to continue. And Akasha sighed heavily. You deserve to be happy. We thought, I am happy, daughter. She pulled her arms from the basin and washed them clean before drying them, her eyes never leaving Anacostia, her daughter, who could suddenly not make eye contact with her. Anna. Sarah tipped Anacostia's chin up so their eyes could meet. I am happy. I know you are. Anacostia sighed heavily. This confused Sarah. Then why? Because you could be happier with someone you love. In for a penny, in for a pound, Anacostia thought as she blazed forward. You could be happier if you were with someone you love, someone that loved you. You deserve to have someone, like Rael and Abigail had Scylla and Adil, like I had Sterling, at least for a short time. Anacostia's eyes clouded over as she thought of her husband, who had died during the Second Camarille War. Sarah's hand fell to her side as she considered what Anacostia was saying. A frown pulled at her lips as she saw the sadness of Sterling's loss cloud over her daughter's face. She wanted to comfort Anna. The moment she moved, Anacostia jerked as if awoken from slumber as she continued her explanation. You could have that too. We want you to have that if it's something you want. The first thought that came to Sarah's mind was that she had a partner, like Abigail and Rael and Sterling. Sarah had Tally. But did she? Did she have Tally in the way she wanted? Tally was the one person that knew everything there was to know about Sarah. Tally was the one person in this life that Sarah trusted more than herself. Tally Craven had become the most precious person in the world to Sarah so long ago that she couldn't even recall when it had changed. When Sarah's devotion to Witchkind had become devotion to Tally Craven. Sarah would do anything to make Tally smile or laugh and bring her happiness. Anything. They worked so well. There was this easy give and take between them, a flow and ability to work in tandem with each other that Sarah had never experienced, not even with the biddies. Or maybe it was different because she had worked so well with so many women who had shared her consciousness. And that connection she held with Tally, the ease in which they jived together was not in thanks to a mental connection or a shared consciousness. It was just something natural between them, something they'd built and maintained. It was something Sarah was proud of. They were an unstoppable team. No enemy that came against them had a chance. You deserve to have a partner that you can be even happier with. You are happy by yourself, but you don't have to be by yourself anymore. The war is over. You're retired. For the most part, you can have a life all your own, and you can have that life with someone at your side, in whatever capacity that means. Anacostia paled a little. Just don't tell me if it's sexually. I'd like to keep pretending that you don't have sex outside of Beltane, and whoever you decide to take as your partner is platonic or romantic only. Sarah chuckled at Anna's continued avoidance of her sex life. She supposed that made sense. Sarah would not have wanted to know about her mother's exploits either. Sadly, Tally Craven was not her romantic partner, not in the way that Sarah wanted. Their closeness seemed to know no bounds. Their connection was intense and precious, but they were not committed to each other. They did not sleep in the same bed. They did not share the same home at all times. They did not consider the other when they made decisions, though Sarah always thought of Tally, and she did not know if Tally thought of her. And for all the hundreds of things that Sarah shared with Tally, there was so much more she would happily share with Honora if given the chance. Although Tally was the only person that Sarah wanted by her side, she knew that eventually Tally would leave her for someone that could give Tally all the things she deserved. Privacy from the prying public eye, untarnished love and affection, safety and security, a home, children. This will make you happy. Me. Going on this blind date? Trying to find someone? Anacostia wouldn't say it would make her happy. This wasn't about making her happy. It will if it makes you happy. Eventually. It wasn't like she wanted her mother to go on this date and fall in love at first sight. It would take time to cultivate a deep connection with anyone. Sarah sighed. Very well. I will meet with your friend. Anacostia cringed. Her mother sounded far from enthusiastic about this. But then maybe she wouldn't ever sound enthusiastic about dating. Dating sucked. Um, Tally cleared her throat as she came into the kitchen, carrying what was really the last of the dishes from the kitchen table. Just a few more? Anacostia glared at the dishes as if they had issued a personal grievance against her. Where were those hiding? Tally tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It seemed strained. She shrugged. On the kids' table. Ah, oops. Anacostia reached for them. Let me take those. You cooked? We've got this. Right, Ma? Yes, of course. You should enjoy the time with your sisters. Tally pulled the dishes back and away from Anacostia's reaching hands. But I could help. Ah. Sarah stepped into Tally's personal space, her eyes soft as she brushed her forefinger down along Tally's nose. Something that made Tally immediately stop speaking and caused her eyes to flutter. No buts. Go. Spend time with your sisters, or at the very least, your nieces and nephew. Tally pouted, but only for a moment, her smile blossoming genuinely. All right. But even as she agreed to leave, she tried to sneak towards the sink. Sarah blocked her path and took the dishes from Tally and handed them to Anacostia, raising a questioning brow at the insolent knower. Tally huffed and spun to leave the kitchen, but she stopped at the doorway. Her hand rested on the molding of it as she looked between Sarah and Anacostia, committing the image to memory. Sarah turned and caught Tally staring. Out with you. Aye, aye, General. Tally mock saluted, but didn't move to leave her new post. Sarah's eyes sparkled as she stepped away from the sink, and as she got closer to Tally, snapped her dish towel at Tally's ass, making the Nora squeal as she jumped out of its reach and left the room saying, I'm going, jeez, I know when I'm not wanted. Gah. The sound of Sarah's laughter followed Tally down the hallway, just as Tally's snickering echoed back into the kitchen. Tally was always wanted, far more than she knew. Anna's eyes softened as she looked between the now empty doorway to the kitchen and back to her smiling mother. Goddess! It would be so easy to just talk with Sarah about how she smiled so beautifully at Tally, how she stared after her, how maybe Tally was a good partner for Sarah to consider. But it was like her tongue was weighed down with lead, maybe even quick-drying cement, as she couldn't say anything on her mind. Not if it implied Sarah and Tally made a good couple. Goddess be damned, she never should have made that goddess-forsaken promise to Tally while the witch was still learning how to control her new cannon work. Shall we? Sarah asked, tossing the dish towel at Anna before she rolled her sleeves back up and began washing dishes. Sarah smiled, unaware of Anna's sudden plight. Sarah felt her heart swell as she heard the sounds of raucous laughter echo in from the sitting room. Tally had certainly arrived and was playing with her nieces and nephew. Sarah looked towards the doorway that led further into her home, where somewhere within these walls was everyone Sarah loved, smiling and laughing and happy. It was more than she could have ever asked for, and more than she ever thought she deserved. I've got him, Abigail promised Tally as she scooped up Cameron from Tally's arms. The 18-month-old was fast asleep and had his thumb in his mouth as he clutched a soft, floppy-eared bunny. It was the same stuffed animal that Tally had given him on his first birthday. Apparently, it was his favorite. He couldn't sleep without it. Tally kissed the top of Cameron's head, breathing in his scent one last time before she let Abigail take him. Her expression was lax as she stared at the boy in Abigail's arms. He immediately snuggled into his mother's neck and kept sleeping, uncaring that he was being passed from adult to adult. Tally brushed her hand over the top of his head, smiling at the way his hair tickled her palm. Tally's voice was soft, whispering so she didn't wake up the sleeping bundle in Abigail's arm. I'll see you guys tomorrow? Of course, Abigail promised, twisting her head to the side as Tally pressed a kiss to her cheek. Adil was standing in the doorway with Kalita beside him. Kalita was holding a sleeping Gemma in her arms, as Adil was weighed down by the bags of gifts that Tally had showered Gemma and Cameron with. See you tomorrow, Sarah, Abigail whispered, smiling at the figure that stood sentry just to the right and behind Tally. Sarah nodded her goodbye. Till tomorrow, Abigail. Tally watched the family leave the house, her shoulders sagging as they stepped through the door and out into the night air, their steps echoing on the wooden porch that led away from the warmth found inside the house. Tally and Sarah remained within. Rael and Scylla had taken Willa back to their family quarters an hour before. Unlike Abigail and Tally, Rael and Scylla still had work tomorrow, but had promised they'd be by for dinner, and to drop Willa off to spend the day with Tally, who volunteered herself as babysitter. "I'm here for 2 weeks. Use me, please," Tally had begged both of her sisters, her eyes wide and puppy-like. And even after all these years, neither Rael or Abigail knew how to resist. Scylla had smirked. "Are you offering your body or your babysitting skills?" Tally grinned at Scylla, her eyes darkening as she took a moment to drag her eyes up Scylla's body from her toes to her suddenly flushed cheeks. Tally's grin was devilish. "Would you say no to either?" Oh, oh, shit, Scylla, stop smacking me. Rael had laughed in uncontrollable laughter until she groaned in pain as she was smacked for laughing loudly at the blush that had darkened Scylla's cheeks. Scylla had evened the score, though, as she leaned across the short distance between them and stared at Tally's pale neck as she whispered into her ear, "I don't know how Sarah would feel about sharing." The flush that appeared like a hot flash spread from Tally's cheek all the way down beneath her shirt to cover her chest, and they were at a stalemate, each with a score of 1. Sarah placed a gentle hand to Tally's shoulder. Before it had even fallen to her skin, Tally was reaching up with both of her own, cradling it. Tally pulled it off her shoulder towards her chest, forcing Sarah to step closer to her to let her long arm drape over Tally's shoulder from behind. As Tally stepped back into Sarah, the back of Tally's head settled into the crook between Sarah's shoulder and neck, her hand absent-mindedly sliding up and down Sarah's arm as she watched Abigail and her family walk down the path that led back to the heart of Fort Salem. Sarah tried to make Tally feel better. The redhead's pain shrouded over them. Sarah wanted to clear them away and bring them back to the pure light that was Tally's smile and happiness. "They will be back tomorrow. I know." And Tally did know that, but her chest still ached as she watched them leave. Tally tilted her head up to stare at the strong jawline of the woman she was wrapped in the arms of. The twist in her chest tightened into a thick knot, unwilling to pass along her upsetment to the generous woman behind her. Tally lifted the hand she held up to her lips. She kissed the side of Sarah's pinky before she stepped out of Sarah's arms. Tally closed the door to the cool night air and leaned her back against it, her hand still holding onto the doorknob so she wouldn't be tempted to take Sarah's hand again. The ache in her chest resonated like a beating drum. Her desire to fall into Sarah's embrace and never leave it was strong. Too strong. "Would you like a nightcap?" Sarah asked. The sudden quiet in the house was a bit unsettling, especially after hours of jovial noise from their larger and growing family. Their presence was missed, and Sarah understood the discomfort Tally felt watching them all walk away. After having spent years living in close quarters as they fought the Camarilla, living separately still took some getting used to, more so after a wonderful evening like tonight. Tally wanted to agree. She adored spending time with Sarah, and after so long apart, she craved as much of Sarah's attention that was possible. I think I'm going to go to sleep. Try and fight off some of this jet lag." Tally hated to watch the hope that had brightened Sarah's eyes dim at her rejection. Tally couldn't stomach the sight of it. "Tomorrow?" she asked, smiling as she picked up both of Sarah's hands, standing closer to Sarah than she wanted to, than was safe. The sparkle was back in Sarah's blue eyes the moment Tally posed the question, so it was worth it. "Of course." Sarah brushed her fingers over Tally's forehead, swiping an errant strand of hair away from her eyes, her fingers pushing it until it rested behind Tally's ear. Tally's eyes fluttered at the soft touch. A sigh escaped her lips as she relished the contact, brief and innocent, and so full of love and adoration, and all the things Tally wanted, but couldn't have. Tally air bussed Sarah's cheek as she passed her. Good night, Sarah. Tally refused to look back, afraid to. If she turned and met Sarah's eyes, she knew she wouldn't end up in her own bedroom tonight. Sarah stood at the base of the stairs watching as Tally climbed to the second floor and then disappeared down the hallway that led to her private room. 2 weeks, Sarah reminded herself as she went into her sitting room. Tally was home for 2 weeks. They had plenty of time to spend together.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.